evening, my friends. This is Paul. But before I begin this video, I want to thank my incredible friend Matt, who made the intro to this video, and unless if he makes something better, I am going to continue using this. He, of his own free will, wanted to make it, so I didn't ask him to, and he also said he wanted it to be epic, just like my famous catchphrase. And I'd like to say he 100% succeeded, and I'm looking forward to not having to pretend to have an introduction anymore with some of my gaming reviews. So with that, let's start from the top. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Crash Bandicoot 4. It's about time. My history with Crash has actually gone back a lot farther than you would expect from someone who primarily only plays Nintendo games. I remember being really impressed with Crash 1 and 2 when I played it on my friend Brittany's PlayStation, especially because the only games I had really played before that were Tarzan, A Bug's Life, Banjo-Kazooie, and Super Mario 64, all on the Nintendo 64, and I remember thinking, wow, Crash actually has personality and animations and voice acting. Man, this makes the Nintendo 64 look like a joke in comparison. Of course, I never finished the two Crash games, but I just remember really being amazed at how the PlayStation didn't even have a control stick, and yet Crash controlled just as fluidly as I would have expected Mario and Banjo and Kazooie to. Then Crash was kind of ho-hum on the Nintendo scene for quite a while, only really appearing in spin-offs, until, finally, it came in the form of the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, which took the first three games and revolutionized the graphics and probably added a few other touches, although I didn't finish that game either. So, going into Crash Bandicoot 4, one of the things that made me the happiest was an option to toggle modern difficulty, which replaces the lives system of the old games and instead just allows you to infinitely keep resetting after every checkpoint, which also makes collecting the Wumpa fruits pointless unless you're a completionist and want to get all of the skins. So with that out of the way, that actually helped me beat the game, and in case you don't believe me, just look at Coco whenever she's running toward the screen. She has an eye patch on to prove that she got beaten up and all the times that I died. So, this game feels more or less like a direct continuation of everything that fans loved of the original Crash games. The level design still feels like it should be a side-scroller, but instead, because this is in the third dimension, it plays with different camera angles to make you think that you're in 3D, when in reality the level design is quite linear. You usually feel like you're in a cramped hallway, and even though the game will sometimes switch to a side-scrolling perspective, you can still somewhat move around in 3D space. A lot of the jumps can be made by just doing standard jumps, although there is a double jump just in case you have too much trouble. You also only take one hit, unless if you have an Aku mask, which gives you another hit. Now, I'm not sure if this was a feature in all the Crash games or not, because it has been a while, but in this game, you can actually hold up to 3 Aku masks to give you even more hits than you could in the original. And if you collect a third mask, then you can actually get invincibility for a little while. Although I didn't actually notice that that was the case until capturing footage for this review. You can switch between Crash and his sister Coco most of the time. You can tell I clearly have preferences. And both of them play exactly the same, so it's really a matter of cosmetics. You unlock different skins for Crash and Coco by completing various objectives within the level, but a lot of these feel more like strict completionist rewards as opposed to one-and-done things. Like, one of the conditions for getting a new skin is that you have to collect all the Wumpa fruits in a level, but that's not the only thing you have to do. You also have to beat the time trial ghost and the inverted challenge and break all the boxes, and it feels like it's just a little bit too much for something that really only provides cosmetics. Like, if you're really going to make the player go through that much effort, shouldn't they have gotten, I don't know, some new powers? Something that'll make the game easier? As sort of like a, hey, you don't just have something to look at, you can actually have something that'll impact the game. Now, I'm sure there's more to discover, but I am not a completionist, and I really respect the game for respecting the player's time, as I didn't want to 100% this game, and I was given the option to just go straight through the main story without having to do any side quests or bonus missions. Now, you can play as other characters besides just Crash and Coco. However, they don't have nearly as much of a presence as the two Bandicoot siblings do in the main story. Thankfully, if you want to experience more of their very unique playstyles, there are alternate timelines on the map where you can choose to play their specific levels and see the adventure through their perspective. I didn't test this because, again, I'm a minimalist. I just wanted to get through the game. But I do appreciate that option, as the new playstyles are definitely welcome at first until you get later in the game where everything starts going to pot. And this is where I start really having problems, because the first couple of worlds were really fun, especially when I went to revisit them with my advanced reflexes from the later worlds. I could complete these older worlds no problem, with only a few trial and error moments. However, the game's two big problems is that the game leans heavily on being hard and frustrating, as opposed to Celeste, which is simply hard, but it's also rewarding. In this game, however, the developers really do not know how to optimize either checkpoint placement or camera controls. In fact, the right stick hardly even does anything. It kind of just jerks a little bit to the side. Very rarely could I actually get the camera angle that I actually wanted, especially in these missions where you have to grind on something. The camera just gives you the worst possible angles, and a lot of times in the later levels, you can't even properly avoid the obstacles because they're just coming into your point of view by the time you're about to get hit by them. In addition, the checkpoint placement is just all wrong. And even if you want to argue, well, Paul, you can't have too many checkpoints, that's the point of hard games, is they don't want to baby you too much. Well, the game does take pity on you if you die too much, as after you've reached a certain threshold of either lives lost or tries, in the case of the modern gameplay like I did, eventually you'll just automatically get an Aku mask when you start up. However, the Aku mask only prevents you from taking damage. It doesn't actually protect you from falling in pits. And since most of my deaths were actually from misjudging the depth and falling into a pit because I couldn't tell where I was in 3D space, I wish there was, like, I don't know, one of those green balloons like in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, where the balloon would fly you out of the pit, but you only had so many so that the game wouldn't be entirely broken. Another thing that's really frustrating is that after you've reached yet another threshold, the game will take an existing box that originally just gave you Wumpa fruits and turn it into a checkpoint. Why wasn't this a checkpoint to begin with? I mean, if you really wanted players to tough it out through all these long platforming sections, why not just give them the option to choose how many checkpoints they have? Ukulele and the Impossible Lair did this by giving you tonics that you could use to choose whether you wanted more or less checkmates, as they called them in this game. So I'm absolutely baffled that they didn't do that with this game. However, despite those major compliments, I still had a blast playing Crash Bandicoot 4. I think one of the highlights for me was the amount of animation and personality the characters had, and the boss battles were phenomenal. I especially love the first two bosses, which are nice references to Guitar Hero, as Activision did have a hand in developing at least some of the games in that franchise. Even when I died in these boss battles, they were still a joy to get through, but they didn't feel necessarily like I was fighting the boss, but more like I was doing an extended creative level. And honestly, some of these boss battles alone were more creative than all of the levels in this game put together. I also really liked the graphics. Really, all of the presentation was stellar. There weren't too many frame rate dips. The graphics had nice shading and lighting. I really like how it felt like what I would imagine Banjo 3 would have looked like if that hadn't been canceled. The voice acting, while there isn't very much of it, also doesn't wear out its welcome. With the exception of the final battle, none of the voice lines are ever repeated. So you don't feel like you're constantly hearing the same old one-liners over and over again, even if you have to replay a scene that had voice acting in it. The story isn't grand or memorable, but it does a good enough job of giving you context as to why is it that you're able to switch back and forth between clear and transparent blocks. Why is it that Crash and Coco are visiting different time dimensions? I love it when stories contextualize your actions. And this game doesn't try to be a visual novel, but at least it gives you something to work with, which is way better than most Mario games that I've played. Speaking of which, R.I.P. Mario. I recorded this the same day that Mario 35 was shut down, so at least this platformer still exists. So I went back and forth on what my verdict was on Crash 4 while I was playing it. There were times where I said this is one of the worst games of 2021, and this is an absolute embarrassment to game design, especially in light of other hard but fair platformers like Celeste. But on the other hand, if it weren't for the bad, or should I say non-existent camera controls and the horrendous checkpoint placement, this is otherwise a fantastic platformer that really does a good job of feeling like it has both personality and charm, looking better than most of Nintendo's first-party efforts, and is a good return to form to what those of us who played the original Crash games were looking for, while also keeping the updated graphics and sound that we saw in the Insane trilogy. So I'm really torn on what I should tell you guys. I think the most safe bet would be if you rent this like I did, so that if you find that you're not really a Crash fan and this kind of really hard level design just isn't for you, then you could just play the first couple of worlds and you're pretty much gonna know what you're getting into by then. However, if you're a diehard Crash Bandicoot fan, then I can see you absolutely loving this game. It has a lot of homages to the past games that, even with as little knowledge as I had, I could still chuckle and say like, oh yeah, I do remember that from Crash Bandicoot 2. And it's also just nice to see Sony's former mascot back in the spotlight in an actual true sequel for the first time since the 90s and early 2000s. Now, would I recommend getting it on the Switch when the other platformers have vastly superior graphics? That's all a matter of taste. As for me, I think performance is more of a big deal than graphics. But at the same time, the Switch is also the only version where you can play it portably, and I played this game almost exclusively portably, so I guess that's up to you. So I think that the safest bet is just rent it. If you're a Crash Bandicoot fan, you'll probably want to either buy it or wait for it to go on sale. But I think even if you were to buy it at full price, there's plenty of optional content that I haven't even touched on that'll keep completionists really busy. Although if Gerard the Completionist's episode is anything to go by, you definitely are going to have a heck of a time doing the 100%. But at least it means you'll never get bored, and the different characters and different locations will give you plenty of unique play styles to make sure that the game never feels like it's overusing a lot of its ideas. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much, Matt, for making this intro. And if I left out anything, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or critiques, please leave them down in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and let's hope Crash Bandicoot doesn't get delisted on March 31st, 2022. Bye!